IVM.
Folks, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. I'm your Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter, and on today's episode, I'm talking with Ravi Handa about fire. Aag wala nahi. We're going to talk about influencers, fire, financially independent, retire early. What all people come up with nowadays? Anyway, Ravi, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks for inviting
Yeah,
me. I'm
I just
happy
reached
to
out
be
to you
here.
on Twitter, and I just love that you just responded instantaneously. So thank you so much for joining us. And it's let's start with your background because you've got this really fascinating background. I don't know many people who've reached where you have reached. Okay, so what have you done? What do you do, if at all?
So, sir, like the most traditional thing to do, I did my engineering first, and after that, I started working in the education sector, so to say. So this is mid 2000s. Then I worked in the education sector for 16, 17
Wow,
odd years. And then I got lucky along the way that I started a company. I got lucky that the company got acquired. And last year, at when I was 39, I decided to, enough, I can't work anymore. So I decided to pull the plug on a traditional job, so to say, and I decided to retire early. So
amazing.
these days, I'm essentially working on a few hobby projects and generally just killing time.
Yeah, I mean, look at that. Engineer, and you're being very humble because you're not saying you're an IT engineer, but I'll take that from there. IT what? Kharagpur. हे भगवान!
Kharagpur,
वो
sir.
तो और
Yes.
ओके आईटी के engineers did a startup. Well, no, worked in education for 16, 17 years, had his own startup, sold it, and now has the full freedom to do whatever he wants actually. And folks, we're coming all the way from Jaipur. I wish that Ravi was here in Bombay. I could have him in the studio, but who knows? Ravi, when you're in Bombay, please do drop by. I'd love to do an episode with you. So you are actually a fellow podcaster. Ravi, you've got your Desi Fire podcast. Tell us about that. Yeah? How long? I mean, podcaster to podcaster, it's
Um,
always great to have people talking about money. Yeah, so lovely. Tell us about that so that our listeners can listen into you.
oh, sure. So essentially, so as I said, that now that I have the free time, I am doing a little bit of experimentation with stuff that I wanted to do. For example, I wanted to have a YouTube channel. Around a year and a half ago, I started a YouTube channel which reviewed single malt whiskies.
अरे क्या बात है!
Didn't
Nice. Okay.
really didn't
हाँ,
really work.
but
Wasn't very popular, and I was
single
doing
malt
it. I did it for
single
six
malt
months
whiskey
or
in India, I'm
so.
sorry to interrupt you, but I have to put in a word out as if you enjoy your whiskey, that's awesome. But single malt Indian whiskey has just taken over the world, right? Folks, just give me 2 minutes to take a slight diversion out here and talk to Ravi about it because we don't talk about single malt on our podcast at all. I personally am more of a vodka drinker, but Ravi, what is the deal out here? क्या हो रहा है मतलब यहाँ पे?
Hmm. So, sir, essentially, the fundamental idea behind single malt was, at least 10 years ago, it used to be that it'll be from Scotland essentially, and that's where it started and that's where it ended. Then what used to happen was some of the Japanese whiskeys started getting a little bit popular. So the Japanese started saying, okay, no, no, we also have single malts. Because essentially the concept of single malt is that you will use a single source of water, single source of barley. Your ingredients should be single. So now, because Scotland has been doing it for what 300, 400 years, they sort of have associated their brand with it. But essentially, there is nothing that is stopping you from making a single malt Jaipur whiskey or a single malt Bangalore whiskey. So that is when the Indian single malts started coming up, and they are becoming really popular now all over the world. Amrit is there. There is Indri, which is there. There is Paul John's, which is a Bangalore-based brand. So there are a bunch of them doing pretty good job, and I like them as well. It's not just because they are Indian. I genuinely like those whiskeys as well. So I was essentially picking up single malts from various parts. I started with the Scotland thing itself, made a few reviews. Okay, this tastes like this. This is, this is the price point at which it is available in India. How easy or difficult it is to get, because with single malts, it's especially in places like Jaipur, it's a problem, and there is the authenticity issue as well. And a lot
Always.
of times, if you buy it from places like Gurgaon, just worked on I worked on that for around 6 odd months. Didn't work at all. The best thing that came out of it was that we formed a hobby group on WhatsApp, which is still fairly active, where we talk about single malt whiskies, but as a channel, it didn't work. So that's why. So the second thing that I wanted to do was, I wanted to talk about the early retirement experience, so to say. And that is where I started the Desi FIRE podcast, because whatever early retirement information that you see on the internet or YouTube, a lot of it is theoretical. It is not people who are actually going through those experiences. It is people advising either for it or against it. So, and even the ones who were doing it, let's say, who were sharing their personal experiences, I did not find many Indians
Hmm.
doing it, because fire in India is a very different beast compared to, let's say, the
Exactly.
US, which is there.
So yeah, I mean, so folks,
Yeah,
Ravi's YouTube channel is what? Ravi Handa? I mean, just find him on YouTube and
Desi Fire
Desi.
podcast. It's called the Desi Fire podcast. So you can just search it. Probably you'll
Yeah, and the
find it.
socials of Ravi are on this, it'll be somewhere in the episode description down there, so you can just figure out, because he posts a lot of his clips on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. So, he's all over the place on content. We're going to get on the content part, we're going to get on fire part, all of this on this episode. Ravi, let's take now two steps back. Okay. I want to deconstruct this in three ways. One, A, what is fire? Okay. B, you spoke about how the US concept and the Indian concept is different. Now, I want you to spend some time explaining to our listeners the US concept version. Okay. We'll get to the Indian concept soon, because that's a very important distinction that you made, and people somehow just don't seem to get it. Okay, and I guess this started somewhere in the lockdown. यार देखो, I'm a very old guy, so मुझे तो ये वैसे भी कुछ समझ में आया है नहीं, generation gap maybe. But please walk our listeners through this concept, okay? FIRE, financially independent, retired early, because you've been featured in the Mint about having made your XYZ corpus or jitna pita, whatever it is. Um, let's start with the concept, the origin, probably the application of it in the US, and then we'll get to the India part. All yours.
So, FIRE, as the name suggests, financially independent, retire early. There are two aspects. A is the financial independence part, which essentially means that you have enough money to take care of your day to day life, of your expenses. You do not need to work for money. The second part of it, which is the RE part or the retire early part, that is typically what happens is people reach this stage of financial independence very late in their lives, at 60, at 65, when they actually retire. Now, thanks to the way the economy has, Indian economy has opened up, and even in the US, a lot of people, what they started doing was, okay, they'll save aggressively so that they build that corpus, and instead of retiring at 60, they are able to now do it at 50, at 40, or even sooner. So that's the broad concept of fire as it exists. It essentially started in the US. It essentially picked up steam after the great financial crisis of 2007 2008, because a lot of people who were very very close to retirement, they saw their entire life savings getting wiped out, and a lot of people lost faith in the financial system, so to say, which in the US, which essentially takes care of you in your old age. So then a lot of people decided, or some people decided, that okay, let us take these things in our own hands, not depend on the government or our standard 401k or our standard plans, and let's try doing this stuff on our own. And there essentially is where it started, and it started becoming popular. People started doing it, and then I believe what happened is it became sort of a dream for a lot of people to sell. So they started popularizing it. Ki, oh, now look at me. I'm sitting in the Caribbean and I'm sipping pina coladas, and life is great, and all of you should, save aggressively, stop working. So they started uh, projecting a very, you know, uh, an Instagram sort of a lifestyle,
Okay.
uh, which is uh, which is extremely untrue because this was being
Here we go.
propelled
Okay.
that
Okay.
way. And that is when because in theory, see, it's very simple to say that in theory you invest money in 15 years at 15% it will become this much, and then you do that. Life doesn't work that way. So post that, that is when some of the serious people who actually believed in the idea and were planning to execute it seriously, they started gathering up in forums like Reddit. Used to be really really big for fire. Reddit had a great Fire India forum as well, which personally helped me a lot in shaping my thoughts. So, and currently, and so this is what happened in the US. Now, over the last 1.5 years or 1.5 years or so, that is when, maybe because that is when I have started, posting a lot about fire, and then a lot of people are reaching out to me, and I'm seeing that there exists some sort of, at least an aspirational idea of fire does exist in India as well. A lot of people are looking at it as a solution to their career frustrations or career problems. Okay, fine, I'll
Yeah.
just work and
I'm
do
going to
that.
hold you there just for a second, Ravi,
Yeah.
because I want to get into the specifics of the fire,
Hmm.
the frameworks and etc. But as someone, I'm assuming you're in the
Hmm.
early 40s, and correct me if I'm wrong, um, who's actually achieved this major goal in India, what are your thoughts about the concept and its applicability to an Indian framework? That's what I want you to explain to us, because you mentioned
It's
this
it's it's
in our
I
earlier part. So I just wanted to just kind of
hmm.
expand on this, because I want our listeners to know from someone who has achieved this. What is his view? And a reasonably,
Fair,
I mean, obviously a
fair.
reasonably smart person, because you're from IT, you hired your startup. So I rarely get this kind of guest and topic actually. So give me your views now.
Fair. See, uh, in the US, there are, see, in fire, fundamentally, there are two aspects of it. One is the financial aspect, and one is the non financial aspect, which includes your psychology, your society, and everything. On both parameters, life is easier in the US because when you talk about the financial support which exists in the US, the sort of social security systems that they have in place, uh, that's really really good if you compare it to something like India. And the other thing is, it is very easy for a person to trust, let's say, the stock market or the bond market, which has a history of 200 years, versus Indians who will probably need to trust markets of who have existed for what, past 30, 35 years. So they don't really have the history. And in the early years, people keep on saying that, oh, after the 92 crisis, the Indian market matured a little. Then after 2008, it matured a little. Then after 2008, it matured a little. And all that is there. So we are still in a maturing phase. We can't really just look at the last 20 years we have made 15% or whatever number. That means we will continue to make that over the next 20 years as well. But if I look at the same data, that over the last 50 years in the US, I have made 8% or 9%, I can fairly assume that over the next 50 years also in the US, I'll make that 8, 9%. It's much easier to trust that economy. So financially, you are a lot more secure. Even, and I have been, I pulled the plug around a year ago. My mom still kind of sometimes tries to push me towards key, if nothing else, let's say you just get started on some sort of regular charity work or something, at least, have some form of discipline in life where you are contributing productively, even if it is not about the money. So I was in the education sector that, why don't you go to a school and teach for charity and stuff like that. So, and because she worked well, I think she worked till late 60s, early 70s. So for her to essentially get the idea that at 40 the kid is just sitting at home, it's a little difficult. What do you do is such a strong part of your identity in India that whenever you're having a conversation, one of the first things is, okay, so what is it that you do? And uh, a very small example could be that, let's say, so I have a 2.5-year-old kid. I'm trying to get him admitted to the
Hmm.
school. So in those
आइए
forms, okay, what is your
आइए सर
parents'
आइए आप अभी
occupation?
मेरे साइड आ रहे हैं बिकॉज मैंने ये
So,
बहुत किया है. What do I do in life? Yeah.
what is your so what is your parents occupation? So in that, even I felt scared that no, I should not write retired. So I have written businessman in that. And depending upon what is happening, I so let's say I took a class a few days ago. So what do you write over there? There I wrote edtech consultant, so that it sounds nicer. So all of these things, all of these social pressures exist in India. In the US, they don't really care, because what is happening, your social circle does not put that sort of pressure on you to be productive, or they don't really interfere in your life. It's very, very common for children to be out of the life by 18. That was after 18 you manage your
Hmm.
finances
Hmm.
yourself and everything. I genuinely do not know a single parent who is either my generation's parents or parents who are in my peer group, who believe that, okay, after 18 we are not going to bother what the kid is doing financially. I do not know a single person like that. Okay, no, we will at least support him in college. And some kid, no, we will at least support him in post graduation. Okay, maybe not the post graduation, we'll help them with the wedding, or all those things are there. I'll need to people at 40. So I have a friend who is my batchmate. He has gotten land with the sole intention of that when I die. So that, why are you buying this? The sole idea behind this is the land that I want to leave for my kid. The kid is what, 10 years old right now. The guy is 40, but that sort of stuff exists, uh, which is simply not there in the US. You look at their interviews, the people who are fired over there early, when they talk about it, this sort of societal pressure that people ask me what you do and all of that, this doesn't
चलो.
exist over there. So that makes, so from a financial aspect as well as a social aspect, it's a lot easier in the US.
मैं तो फिर भी how
See,
you're someone who slogged, you've passed one of the most toughest exams, set up your own startup. धक्के कहाँ हैं अपने लाइफ में यार? I mean, everything said and done, what Deepak Chennai calls the school of hard knocks. You've actually gone through that. But now when you see people who are 25 who want to achieve your level of success and fire at your age without probably, I'm assuming, doing the hard work, what do you tell these guys? Because when you see people shocked at the 70 hour number, and for me it's a very normal thing. Yeah, but मैंने तो मेरे career में किया था. I तो never even counted hours. I don't know about you, Ravi, but at least that's what I did. And I'm not saying it as a badge of honor or pride. करना है नहीं करना है नहीं करना है whatever. How do you have a conversation with these people?
sir, uh, and ए आई थिंक कि आजकल के ये जो 25-year-old हैं, उनमें इतनी हिम्मत है कि क्वेश्चन कर पा रहे हैं अपने बॉसेस को 70 आर पे. आई थिंक दैट्स अ
I
बहुत
agree.
बड़ी
I
चीज.
totally agree with you on that. Yeah, yeah.
सेकंड, व्हेन आई वाज 25, सर मुझ में तो हिम्मत नहीं होती थी कि मैं बॉस को किसी भी चीज के लिए मना
Same
कर दूं
here.
कि नहीं, मैं नहीं आऊंगा सैटरडे को. कैसे नहीं आऊंगा भाई, सर ने बोला है तो आना पड़ेगा. मतलब अनटिल एंड अनलेस देयर वाज सम वेरी बिग जेन्युइन एक्सक्यूज कि हाँ मेरे को फ्लाइट पकड़नी है, या मेरे को जो है कहीं जाना है, मेरा प्रायर कुछ कमिटमेंट है, एक्स्ट्रा बोला है बॉस ने तो बोला है.
You have
मतलब
to
इट्स
do it. Yeah, you have
नॉट
to do it. Yeah.
अपनी चाहता, you have to do it. So that so I think that is a very good sign for the economy that kids have, sorry, 25-year-old people have the confidence to say such stuff. Now, coming to the part of it, people who come to me, and yes, there have been more than a few 25-year-olds who, want to follow this particular path. Two things that I like to tell them. One is that this should not be your goal in the first place. I do not think that this should be your goal. Your goal should fundamentally be that, the reason why you are going towards this is because you don't like what you are doing. Now, ideally speaking, you should figure out what you want to do in life and
Wow.
pursue that. Now, people
Do people get this? I mean,
say,
do
ki,
people actually get this?
I don't know. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. That should be the goal for you to pursue. That is the ideal goal. The second goal would be that, okay, let me just find something which I do not hate. At least it's on a neutral
Give me a nuance
territory.
here. No, no, hold,
And
hold,
if
hold,
you
hold, hold.
cannot,
I want the listeners to understand the
yeah, go ahead.
nuance. Doing something you love or doing something you don't
Um,
hate. Please explain this because I know what you're talking. I want our listeners to know what you mean.
okay. So I'm just taking a hypothetical example. So let's say there are people who I assume would like to become musicians but are not able to become musicians because that is not really a career path for someone. And you need to be really, really good to become a musician or artist of any form. So that is something that they would love to do, but can you make a career out of it? Probably not. So then the next best thing that comes in that, okay, what you do is you become a music teacher. Because as a career, see, becoming a music teacher would probably be a lot more stable in terms of money and everything. So this will be something that you don't really hate. Ideally, you wanted to be a musician, not able to build a career in that because a very tiny fraction can. But there can be a lot of music teachers in the world. So this is where
Okay.
you,
Thank
set your mark that this is not something that I hate. And the third would be I am working in a Bangalore startup as VP customer acquisition or
you.
something
Yeah.
like that, which is essentially what you hate to do, but you have to do it because money is important. So, what I like to recommend these people is that, okay, try and figure out doing something that you don't really hate. If you can do that, brilliant. Once you give up on that idea that, okay, I'll not be able to find something that I love, not something that I don't hate, the third level is that you start thinking about fire as a goal, and 25 is way too early for that. बस 10 साल काम करके देखो तो सही कि तुमको क्या आता है क्या नहीं आता है क्या तुम सीखते हो क्या तुम नहीं सीखते हो so give it a
Yeah.
decade. Once you have a decade of working you will broadly know कि okay how which direction I should take. If you are not able to do that then you think about
Yeah.
fire. And then the second part, how do you actually financially achieve that? Now, for that, again, in the US, it is a little bit possible where you can just keep on saving aggressively and do it because of the various tax incentivized the 401ks, the Roth IRAs, which exist where people need to match, and you can drastically reduce your cost of living in the US and stuff. But in India, it's really, really difficult. The amount of money that you need would be uh, substantially higher here as a multiple
Sure.
of your expenses. And the reason for that is how do you achieve that is you need something to work in your favor, something extra. Just by saving from your income, I don't think it's really possible. So that extra could be you worked at a startup, you got some ESOPs, and those ESOPs got liquidated,
Bonanza.
and
You have a big pay. Yeah.
you have a big payout. The other thing could be that maybe you get a second additional degree. So this is where I used to teach for MBA students. So I've seen people who were earning 3 lakhs per annum. They did really well and got into an IIM, and the first salary after 2 years was 30 lakhs per annum. So this 3 to 30 in 2 years is because they were able to crack that a top IIM sort of a position. So that is something that you can try. Another thing that that, but these are hard
Yeah.
things to
Yeah.
do, and you need a lot of luck to work in your favor because You
Luck
could be
with hard
every
work. Luck
company.
with hard work.
Luck with hard work is needed. What the third option, which I believe is a lot easier, is you start looking outside India for your career. So it's again, it comes from the sample bias that I have, because a lot of people that I
Hmm.
talk to, the 25-year-olds, they are working in the technology sector. And for those guys, it's not really that difficult to find a job
Sure.
outside India. And I'm not saying that it has to be only US. Yeah, so US, Canada, somewhere in Europe, the amount of money that you make there and spend there is a lot higher than in India. But even the savings are significantly higher. So, what in all probability, what the median guy will make in India in a period of 25 years is probably something that the same guy, if he had chosen to go to the US or UK or somewhere, will probably do it in 8-10 years. So if you want to retire by 40, one pretty good plan could be that you are 25 right now, try to get outside India in US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere where the pay is high. Come back to India after 15 years, and then you can very easily do it. So but this something extra is required. If you believe that you will just, instead of saving 30% of your income, you will save 40% of your income and you'll be able to do it. Or I'm investing in large cap funds, instead of that, if I invest in small cap funds, I'll be able to do it. All those things are not going to happen. 12 to 15% CAGR makes a lot big difference. I
Yeah,
know, I
yeah.
have taught math, I understand that it makes a big difference, but the base has to come in from somewhere
ठीक है.
else.
I'm going to get into the specifics of this 12-15% CAGR, large cap, mid cap, all of this, specifics, because you've given us a nice philosophical, or at a conceptual level, you've explained how this works. Right?
Hmm.
Assuming that, this person wants to retire at 40. Ravi, now let's get to the specifics. Okay. You gave us a nice conceptual framework about how you need to have a certain bonanza, lump sum coming to nudge you, because if you're looking at a salary, at just a salary from 25 to 40, तो भाई उसमें तो in India's current situation is not going to happen. But now let's move a few blocks here and there. Tell us about how this is reasonably achievable, sitting in India, investing in India. I don't know, maybe play around with the age, okay? Because I know that you're very good at CAGRs. I know that you know how corpus works. So, if there's a listener out there who's now thinking after listening to you, यार चलो ठीक है ये सब तो सुन लिया, I've heard everything, but give me a plan now. Like, okay, you said that I can't retire at 40, no problem. Let me move that to 50. Let me move that to 55, or let me move that to 60, or whatever it is. Let's just talk real numbers, a plan, so that someone can, who's listening to this, can go back with something in his head. Oh, her head. Sorry.
Fair, fair. See, the first thing that you need to do is somehow derive at a fire number. That should be essentially your first step. That which is your financial independence number. That is, how much money do I need? Now, that money could be 5 crores for someone, 8 crores for someone, 20 crores for someone, but you need to know that. And how do you know that? There are large number of calculators which are available, which give you a rough idea. Everyone's situation would be different. And once you have that FI number as a target, and then you back calculate from that. So just to give you a brief idea of the number, say I am a 40-year-old guy. Now at 40, I believe the amount of money that I would need is 30x plus y, where x are my annual expenses. So let's say if my annual expenses are 20 lakh rupees, so 30 into 20 lakhs, that is 6 crores, plus y as a number. Y is any big, large ticket expense that I see happening in my life. For example, could be that you want to save for your kids' education in the US, which currently costs, say, around 1 crore rupees, you want to save for that. Or it could be your kid's wedding, or it could be a world tour, or you want to buy a Ferrari at some point of time, blah, 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 blah. So whatever is that number in today's rupees, you have that number and that becomes your Y. So 30x plus Y becomes your FI number. So let's say you want to save another extra 1 crore, which will take care of your kids' education. So 6 plus 1, 7 is your number. Once you have that number in place. Then you backtrack, where are you right now? So suppose you are at zero right now. That is possible. So then you figure out how do you actually save more and more of your income. I believe that if you're not saving 50% of your income, then it is virtually impossible to do it, even at 50, to be really honest. Maybe you save 50% of your income because as you mature, your income would grow. So at that
I'm
point
just
of
going to
time.
stop you here
So a minimum of
for the
50%.
for the
Yeah.
50% number, just to get a little bit of more, side disclaimers and side notes. You're saying 50% net tax. Like if I earn 100, I'm already paying whatever 25, 30 to the government, and
Yeah.
out of
Yeah.
that,
Net
that's
tax.
net of tax. And of the 50 that I'm
Net of
spending,
tax.
it also includes housing, because I think that housing is the biggest chunk.
Everything.
Let's go. Let's go.
Everything. So
Let's go.
I just
Sure.
everything. So unless you are saving, unless you are saving half of your take home income, it's going to be very, very difficult. The numbers just don't work out because your expenses will also keep on growing at a certain rate because of inflation. I understand that your income will probably grow at a higher rate, but your salary is not going to double every 3 years. So uh, because of this, your first thing should be that you need to save at least 50% of your income. You can do the numbers, and what it comes out is, if I remember correctly, I might be wrong here, that if you're saving 70% of your income, then you can typically hit your target number in you know roughly 10 or 11 odd years. But for that, you're saving 70% of your income and then investing a bulk of it in equities and hope that the market gods are good in that 10-year period
Mm-hmm.
towards you. And as you keep on reducing this percentage, let's say if this percentage comes to 60, the number of years that required is that keeps on going higher. And all this is all theory, which will go to waste very quickly depending upon you will in a 10-year period you will have one particular year which is a minus 25% year on the
Yeah.
market.
Yeah.
Now if it happens in right in the beginning or in the end, or it happens twice in that
You
10-year
don't know. It's
period,
not in
which
your
is
hands. Yeah.
very much possible, so your entire plan goes out of whack. But the idea is, if you're saving aggressively, instead of 60 you might be able to do it at 55 or 50 or 45 whenever you are able to do it. The goal is to retire early. The goal should never be to retire at 45, at 50, at 55, because if you set that sort of a framework, it becomes very, very difficult. I remember one particular example where there were two astronauts who were in space for like 6 months or so, and one guy was supposed to go back. Then 10 days before going, the guy, the other astronaut started telling 10 more days you have to be here, then 9 more days you have to be here, oh, 8.5 days are left. So, and when the astronaut came back, he said, I had no problem with the first 5 months and 20 days. It's the last 10 days became really excruciating because someone kept on reminding me that this deadline is coming, that this is there and that is there. So that's why I never have a goal like retire at 45 or 50 or 55. Just save aggressively and pull the plug when you are confident of pulling the plug.
Okay. Give me some numbers to work with on the investment portfolio. Like, what should I assume? I'm sitting out there. You told me about saving aggressively. Great. 70% great, or whatever the number is. As you age, that number will on its own have to go down, unless you probably become a double income, no kid kind of thing. Or all that aside, give me some numbers that our listeners can somewhere plug in their mind ki yaar chalo theek hai. I know the difference between annual return and CAGR, and I know what Ravi is saying ki bhai then 1 year you will be down 25%. But Ravi also talks about compounding being a miracle and 8 miracle. यार ऐसा कैसा बोल रहे हो यार? ये 25% डाउन हो गया प्लस कंपाउंडिंग मिरेकल हो गया. So jokes apart, what
Okay, so
what should we put in our head out here?
So again, essentially, it depends on how far you are from that fundamental FI number. कि भाई अगर आपको 7 करोड़ चाहिए और आप आज की डेट में आपके पास में 5 करोड़ है, इट्स अ वेरी डिफरेंट डिस्कशन रादर देन आपको 7 करोड़ चाहिए और आपके पास में आज
Correct.
50 लाख है. So that being said, the idea is that in the early stages you don't really think that much about asset allocation and all of that. Have an emergency fund in place. Now that could be 6 months of expenses, that could be 1 year of expenses, whatever you believe is the right number. Everything else just goes into low cost index
Mm.
funds. So broadly speaking, so let's say if you're saving 100 rupees, a good thumb rule could be an 80-20 sort of a thing, where 20% goes in your debt based assets, your fixed income assets, cash in the bank, and 80% goes into equities. And there you just blindly get an index fund. Don't try to optimize that, okay, I'll do this and that, because use all of that time and energy on making more money. Because if you're trying to optimize, there will be a time to optimize on the returns on your corpus. That time will be when you retire. So that is the point of time where you can start thinking about that. Okay, what should be an ideal asset allocation so that I can
Yep,
take
yep,
it,
yeah,
make it
yeah.
stretch longer or leave a bigger number. But in the early stages, just simply get low cost index funds and let the corpus grow. In theory, if it keeps on growing in a straight line fashion, which will not happen, in theory, it would take 10, 12 years to get to that particular number if you're saving 70%. But because of these, 25%, 30%, 50% falls in a year, which may or may not happen in that 10, 12 year period of yours. But if they do happen, the number
Yep,
gets
yep,
changed.
yep. Very interesting. Chalo, folks. So, and a small disclaimer again. What Ravi is saying is very general, broad advice that may or may not apply to you, might apply in some way to another person or not. So, just please, we are just setting very broad parameters out here. Which actually gets me to my next question here, Ravi. Now that we are done with this part, with financial advice, everybody out there is like, अभी मैं खुद का podcast कर रहा हूँ, आप खुद का podcast कर रहे हो, you're doing your podcast, I'm doing my podcast, पता नहीं what all. And we've actually had a conversation about this on Twitter. Uh, Help our listeners make a checklist of credibility. The who to believe, because I put on my mobile phone, Twitter is full of 10 things. Buy this cap mutual fund, buy that cap mutual fund. Reel kholo to koi bolega ki FD is useless. This is useless, that is useless, and this person has got like 100,000 million, pata nahi how many followers. YouTube channel has got another 10 million. So, matlab, your the thing with social media is it's put these numbers to everybody. It's like your self-esteem and your net worth is reflected in those numbers. I kind of feel bad for the current generation that they have to go through this, but that's a separate topic. So just, and the conversation I remember having with you on Twitter is that you kind of have some skepticism on the world of advisors out there, right? And you being someone who also puts out a lot of content on a daily basis. And by the way, folks, if you don't know, then Ravi's tweets have got some insane engagement levels. You should check that out. He's been very open and transparent about how that works. So if there's someone who understands financial content out there, and even content in general, it's Ravi. So Ravi, help us out here.
So, to be really honest, I come with a very, negative approach towards financial advice in general. And that is rooted into multiple things. A is you do not know whether the other person is knowledgeable enough or not. It could be your dad's friend who is advising you. It could be a YouTuber. Just because he has an extra number of followers does not mean that he is a legitimate guy. So you need to be skeptical. So the idea is you need to educate yourself. You cannot trust anyone just because that guy works at your bank and ICICI is a very reputed organization does not really mean that A, he is very knowledgeable, or B, he has your best interest at his heart. So that becomes one problem. The only way you can avoid this is by becoming knowledgeable yourself. So, to a certain extent, what I have seen is, broadly speaking, the relationship managers on an average would be worse than the mutual fund distributors, on an average would be worse than the fee only financial advisors who exist. Now, these would be, the SEBI registered ones. But that does not mean that these are the averages or the medians in place. That does not mean that a mutual fund distributor will always be better than a relationship manager, because personally, a lot of the stuff that I got into was thanks to my bank's relationship manager, who told me about schemes like senior citizen savings scheme for my parents. I did not know about that. He was the one who told me, who looked at the number of transactions that I was doing, and he told me that, okay, you need to be cognizant of the fact that there is, with every switch you are making from one mutual fund to another, there will be a capital gain tax which is
Mm, mm,
there.
mm,
And okay, this is many many years ago. Now I know more about it, but so my bank relationship manager has been great. Every other guy that I talk to, their bank relationship managers are horrible. So that is there. Mutual fund distributors, again, could be good work or could be bad, where they're prioritizing, you know, a higher
yep, yep,
commission,
yep, yep.
etc. When it comes to the fee only guys, there, the one thing that you are sure of is that they it's very unlikely that they would benefit from the advice that they give you in form of commissions, and so pushing product X versus product Y does not necessarily, 99% of the cases won't
Mm,
benefit them. But there comes the issue of A, competence, and B, uh, why should they even care about you? So my experience with mutual fund distributors has been great and has been horrible. My experience with fee only SEBI registered financial advisors has been great and has been horrible. So that decision needs to be taken on an individual basis, and that is only possible if you know what the other guy is talking about is making sense or not. You know, even till today, you walk into a bank, you will have some sort of a relationship manager pushing a ULIP plan to my own brother-in-law who is 57. That happens, and if you do not know, so you need to educate yourself. That is the only way. There is no other stamp of approval that you can look at.
Let's move to the other side, na, the free advice, the finfluencers, which has become more. Ye to pata hai, yaar. The thing is that you've
Yeah,
given us a very nice
yeah,
overview of the
huh.
traditional, I would say, sources of advice that we used to have and still
Hmm.
have, by the way, for a lot of people. What about this brand new world of absolutely everything free? Content creators who have just sprung up, and what about them? How should our listeners approach them?
You listen to them, you learn from them, but if you're going to take any sort of action just based upon what someone has said, that is a problem.
Mm,
So let's say if you listen to someone and they tell you that right now is a very good time to invest in REITs, just as an example, and you don't even know what an REIT is. And based upon that, you are investing in REITs, and in 1 year, you find out that, oh, that guy's advice worked
mm,
brilliantly. So next time, I'm also going to do the same. In this 1 year, what would have happened is, the guy who was at 100,000 followers, he would have blown up to 1 million followers because his advice about
worked.
REITs
Yeah.
worked. That has worked. It may be because of his talent, it may be because of luck. I don't think I can judge that. It's guy's talent or luck, but it is not even if he's talented, or even if he's
Mm,
lucky, all his calls are not
mm,
going to be right. So you cannot blindly trust anyone. However, what a lot of these content creators also do is they try and tell you about that, okay, what is an REIT? So if an influencer, if a content creator, if a Insta celebrity is telling you what an REIT is, brilliant. Please listen to that. Please educate yourself from it. If there is someone who is telling you to take an action, okay, think about that, evaluate it yourself. Do not take an action based upon what someone is saying. Because, as I said, in case of relationship managers, in case of mutual fund advisors, mutual fund distributors, this happens. The advice is, it there might be some sort of commission, something coming their way, which is pushing them towards advising X versus Y. The same thing would happen with influencers as well. But if someone is telling you about what an REIT is, or if someone is telling you about FD is bad, fine, FD is bad, why, this is the reason why FD is bad, you understand that, brilliant. So you have to look at it from a learning perspective and not an advice perspective. So that
Okay.
distinction needs to be
So,
made.
ठीक है. Last question now, Ravi, for the main show. Some good habits. Like yesterday, I saw you tweet about NPS, and at least I'm a believer in NPS, although people have different views for whatever reason. But in general, good habits and tips on personal finance that you consider, are pretty important for all of us. Again, in general, and you know, list of those habits probably also then link to the kind of mistakes that you see people making most often.
Okay, so as I said, see, when it comes to finances, a lot of people, you know, will be greedy, and it's understandable, and which pushes them in directions that they should not be going. They do not know enough about topics, enough about products that they're buying, which is the fundamental cause of people losing money. Yes, there is definitely a luck element into it. There, I'm not going to deny that, but broadly speaking, if you are investing in the equity markets for the long run, it is going to do well. As a matter of fact, in case you are investing even in FDs, the whatever return that is told to you, you will get it. There is very little chance that your bank is going to fail. And I see people making FDs in one bank for 5 lakhs, in another bank for 5 lakh, instead of making a 10 lakh, because RBI has I believe these numbers are correct, that RBI has a 5 lakh limit. I These sort of optimizations, I don't really think make that much of a difference to your finance. It puts unnecessary stress. So if you
Sure.
can just educate yourself with the help of a couple of books, influencer videos, newspaper articles, there are multiple sources which exist, but you need to educate yourself.
चलिए sir, ठीक है. That's we are done with the main part of our show. Our standard question to all our guests, Ravi: any book, any content for that matter, could be a series that you're watching, a book that you're reading, or anything at all. Recommendations for our listeners. Go for it.
Okay, so in Indian content, I really liked Kala Pani, which came out recently on Netflix. In global content, I just started watching. I've seen first couple of episodes of Bodies on Netflix. That also looks really promising. In terms of books, so that is where, especially as far as the financial aspect is concerned, when I if you can read just 3 books, I believe, you know, about personal finance and money in general, you 90% of the people don't need anything beyond that. One would be Let's Talk Money by Monica Hallan. That is probably the first book that you should start with. The other one is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. That's more on the philosophy side of it rather than the personal finance side of it. And the third one is Deepak Shinoy's Money Wise, is the third book. So first and third are very Indian focused. So why it came to that is because currently I'm reading Let's Talk Mutual Funds by Monica Hallam. That also is a very nice and interesting book, so to say. So these are some of the books that you can read and educate yourself. When it comes to
Lovely.
YouTube channels, I my personal fire journey, I always wanted to, who wants to work? So I've always been lazy. But my personal fire journey, I would give a lot of credit to it for a channel called Two Sides of Fire, Two Sides of Financial Independence, which is where two friends essentially. So one guy is retired, one guy is planning to retire, and they just chit chat about their life and how they're planning and the money aspect of it. So that's a channel that I very strongly recommend. There is another channel called The Fired Couple, which is a couple of Indians who are now on a world tour post fire. So that is also something that I really like. And obviously, I would want my subscribers to go from 5,000 to
Hmm.
5,100. So the Desi Fire Podcast is my YouTube channel. That's another YouTube channel that I would recommend people to check out.
Fantastic, folks. I'll just recap that for you. Of course, there's Kalapani and Bodies on Netflix. Three essential books that Ravi spoke. Let's Talk Money by Monica Halan. Psychology of Money, of course, by Morgan Housel. Money Wise by Deepak Shenoy. YouTube channels, of course, Two Sides of FI. Two Sides of FI, whatever. Fired Couple. And, of course, Ravi's own podcast. Please do listen, like, subscribe, share to the Desi Fire Podcast on YouTube. But that's a wrap on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Ravi Handa. Ravi, thank you, yaar. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
IVM.